Hey, Mockingcasters. I want to take a couple minutes before the episode to update you on some exciting things happening in the sort of Mockingbird sphere. First up, we have just published the brand new issue of our print magazine. It is the Sickness and Health issue. We're going to talk about a couple of those articles in the magazine on this episode of the Mockingcast. But if you are not a subscriber to the Mockingbird Journal, I just could not commend it to you more. It is beautiful, it's wide-ranging, it's profound, and it's full of the sorts of conversations that you hear on the Mockingcast. It's sort of, we're informed by them, and in turn hope you would be enriched by them. So if you're looking for more from Mockingbird, that is one place to start. I'll put the link to where you can subscribe in the show notes. You can also just order just this issue, or you can become a monthly supporter of Mockingbird. All monthly supporters of Mockingbird do receive a complimentary subscription. Highly, highly recommended, and we are just doing everything we can to get this in more hands because it's just that good. Secondly, we have started a new book club, a virtual book club, where every month those who are interested will gather on Zoom to discuss a particular book as sort of moderated by some member of the kind of Mockingbird staff or volunteer core. I'll be doing the first one on Nick Cave's book, Faith, Hope, and Carnage on March 26th, but I'll put the link to where you can to sign up for that. And you can see the whole schedule of what we'll be reading and when and who will be leading the discussions. Again, some of it's fiction, some of it's nonfiction, some of it's theology, some of it's poetry, some of it's short stories. We're trying to, cover a lot of ground, but always with the through line of grace. And finally, our New York conference is filling up. It happens April 27th to the 29th. If you've never been to a Mockingbird conference, this is the kind of where it all started. It's our 15th time doing it. And this year, just the lineup is stellar. It could not be sort of a more perfect place to come and experience what this whole project and this podcast that you've stumbled upon is really about. That's April 27th to the 29th in New York City, and we only have, we're about 6 weeks out, 30 tickets left. So if you are planning to come, please do buy your ticket ASAP. I think that's it. Without any further ado, let's get going. Welcome to the Mockingcast, the podcast of Mockingbird Ministries. I'm David Zoll, your host, and in a few moments, I'll be joined by my co-hosts, Sarah Condon and RJ Heyman. We come to you every other week to discuss a few of the places where we currently see grace and its absence playing out in unexpected and compelling ways. We're glad to have you with us.
Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord.
It has been a second, you guys. We skipped an episode because I was traveling to Tejas, and on the plane to Austin, Texas, I ran into none other than RJ and Jamie Heyman.
We tried to avoid you, but you hunted us down.
They acted like they didn't know me. Who's that guy with the huge headphones? It was...
Did y'all really not know you were going to see each other?
I did not know. No.
I mean, I knew that Dave was heading
crazy.
to Austin that weekend, but I had no idea.
Right.
We both had connections in, I think, Charlotte. And we got up to the gate, and we're like,
so
hey,
funny.
hey. So
I know you.
It was
That's
kind of
awesome.
fun.
RJ's on the phone, like, putting out fires, at the church, and I'm just...
I was on
digging
the phone. I
music.
felt bad.
But
We had a nice
was a
little
little
visit. We
awkward.
hugged it out. And then, yeah, it was great.
We didn't try to sit next to each other, though. I mean, that was not, like...
That's a
let's not
bridge
go
too far.
I was like, did you have a conversation? We're like, okay, but can you just we don't have to do
Dave
this.
had
all
better
the time.
seats than we did. So
I definitely did. I'm not going to lie. It was Austin is... It feels like going to the West Coast at this point. That's everyone's very image conscious, shall we say.
Yeah.
But, that
now,
makes
like
for
in Charlottesville, where nobody
delicious
cares.
food. Well, I'm just saying, it feels like a West Coast version of that.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
I got to hang out with these wonderful people at Covenant Presbyterian there, and John Wasson is who brought me there and loves the Mocking Cast. A big shout out to him and the wonderful work they're doing. So that was super cool. It was a real highlight. And I got to also go to a place called Laity Lodge, which I'd never been to and just been hearing
that's
about for
awesome.
years and years and years. And it's just kind of like... Oh, it's like it's a landscape I'd never seen, like kind of canyon, desert, river, Texas thing, hill country, I guess it's called, and I was
Hill
very
country, yeah.
taken with
It's
it. I
legit.
understand why people like it.
It's
yeah,
beautiful.
gorgeous.
Yeah.
Sarah, what's going on with you?
Ooh, well, we're about to go on spring break, so
Early. No,
just
yeah.
getting
Next week?
Yeah,
Next week?
Next week.
Awesome.
Just kind of getting ready for that. Yeah, we're headed to Mississippi, which my children are now at a point where they're like, people go places other than Mississippi, right?
Right.
I'm like, I know, but that's where we're going again. So yeah, we're good. My brother we had the baby shower for he and his wife this past weekend, and I feel like it was another major milestone we managed to survive given the very present absence.
Yeah.
So that felt like a kind of an accomplishment, to be honest with you. So yeah, we're good.
RJ, what do you have to say?
We're also doing well. We had a great time visiting my oldest son in Austin, and we basically just either ate food or binge watched Full Swing on Netflix for the entire weekend, which was great because my wife and I was just like, the two of us, we love our 6-year-old, but it's nice to have a break. And
Yeah.
so the two of us just kind of chilled. The weather wasn't that great. It was a little cloudy and cold and rainy and stuff, but it was actually nice. It was the perfect excuse to sort of do nothing and actually lay low. And that was really,
And
really nice.
Full Swing is that Netflix series of sort of documentaries about golfers.
It is,
that
which
is
sounds like the
fascinating.
most boring thing on earth, especially if you're not a big golf fan. I'm honestly not a big golf fan, and Jamie does not like golf at all, but it's so good.
Yeah.
And especially because it's just like one really good dad after another. Like not just the golfers themselves, but their fathers. And you have this image in your head of these super, demanding sports parents. And
Tiger Woods' dad. That's the
Yeah.
he's the archetype of
But
it.
these dads are not Tiger Woods' dads. Some of these dads had fathers like Tiger Woods' dads, but they said, I'm not going to raise my son like that. I'm always going to remind him that golf is a game. It's a game, and it should be fun. And it was very encouraging on that level. So I commend it to you if you've not watched it. When you're done watching The Chosen, Sarah.
Every now and
White
again, that'll
Lotus.
like pop into my brain.
Yeah.
It'll be like, you haven't watched The Chosen yet. And I'm like, yep, not the time
I
right
picked
now.
it back up this week because I had a day where I was I was feeling kind of not well, and I hadn't watched it in a while, and I cried again. I cried again.
Oh my gosh. Well,
it's
people
good,
have-
man. It's good.
People have sent me messages that are like, I know that RJ said it and you're not going to listen to him, but it's really good. And I'm
because
these
like,
RJ's
messages
taste
too.
is terrible.
I'm like, okay, like, have you seen White Lotus?
I have not. I have been watching Last of Us though, which is probably at least as depressing as
so
White Lotus, right?
beautiful. It's really
the last
yeah,
episode was
yeah.
bleak. Ooh.
Was it?
yeah.
Well, I have to say,
I mean, zombie
it's-
apocalypse, but yeah.
It's hard. Yeah, it is hard. It's not a light subject.
It's a hard life when you're being invaded by mushroom zombies.
It is.
But hey, Pedro Pascal, he's
amazing.
What do they call him, Daddy? So, well, let's. We're gonna cut that.
We're not cutting that. And are we sure it's not Zaddy? Okay, so
That is. Well, let's actually something sort of big did happen that you didn't mention, Sarah, and that Sarah broke her writer's block for a shining moment, and you wrote something called
One
Grace
shining moment
for Almond Moms. Grace for Almond Moms. This is a fresh term to me, but it made perfect sense when I read it, and I'm going to read a little bit of it to you guys. This is you writing, Sarah. My mother's mother put her on her first diet when she was in elementary school. She would skip lunch at school and eat a hamburger patty when she got home. I find myself astonished that my grandmother, who had survived the Depression with all of her family's food shortages and poverty, would have the capacity to do such a thing. But that's how important it is to be a thin woman in America. There have been some recent very funny videos on social media that young women have made describing their mothers as quote-unquote almond moms. The concept came from an episode of the Housewives television franchise. In it, a mother suggests to her very hungry daughter that she simply have a few almonds. Almond moms might suggest that you, quote, save your calories for the big meal, or suggest that you should get a bowl for those chips instead of mindlessly eating them from the bag. They will pull out the classic, a moment on the lips, a lifetime on the hips phrase. These observations are meant to be relatable and funny, but they also feel deeply sad to me because I have my own inner almond mom, just like my mother did, just like her mother did. And if we think these almond moms are saying this to their kids is terrible, just imagine what they're saying to themselves. While it's easy to dismiss these mothers as ill-informed and cruel, it seems to haunt all of us, regardless of how much we measure up. Many women have seasons of their lives where we are home with children, and there are days that it can feel as though we are seemingly little value. And so control over our bodies becomes the focus. The highest iteration of womanhood has been to be the thinnest one in the room, no matter where that room exists. To be the thinnest is to be the best. So I pray for grace for the almond moms I know, myself included. We cannot shame ourselves into breaking the curse of thinness. We can only ask that God would rescue us from even that burden, silly as it may feel. For the sake of our daughters, of course, but also for the sake of ourselves. We can also laugh at ourselves and the ridiculousness of trying to perfect something, I guess the body, that is always and forever headed towards the grave. Remember that death is imminent and that the goodness of Jesus is true. And then find some humor to hold on to. When my mother died, a friend came over to help me get her ashes into the urn I ordered. They almost didn't fit. I yelled out, "If you just would have stuck with the diets, Mom." And I could hear my mom laughing with us. So, Sarah, talk to us about this. Clearly, it struck a chord with a lot of people, and although I was unaware of the almond moms phenomenon, I'm no stranger to the fact that the pressure that women feel to be thin is just abiding and crushing and free-floating almost at this point. But talk to us. I want to hear more of what you're thinking.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I now work with college students, and I do hope and pray, and I feel, and maybe it's just the population I work with, I feel like they are not as fixated on thinness. But, when I was growing up, it was like Britney Spears, low-cut jeans, preferably a belly ring, if your abs are flat enough for such a device. Just like, thinness was the way, the truth, and the life. I mean, it really was. And I'm starting to see, I'm hoping a shift, but that doesn't mean that those of us who, were sort of just we were run over by a dump truck with the gospel of thinness as children. It doesn't mean that, that we don't still carry some of that. And, it's interesting to age, right? Because I love seeing these young women offer critique. Most of all, because it tells me that they're thinking about things differently, right? They're not fixating so much on thinness. But it also, like, as I'm aging, I see, you just get more grace, goggles, I think, as you age, and you see the bigger landscape, and you see the mothers that are saying these crushing things to their children, really their daughters. And you're like, oh, but what is lurking inside you, that this is coming out of your mouth. And I think I just hoped, I can't make all your moms die.
I'm glad.
But,
If only I had that power.
Yeah, I don't have that power. But I can tell you that when your mom dies, you realize how stupid worrying about all that stuff was. And it just kind of frees you even more. So I was hoping, in referencing her ashes at the end, that I could offer just a little bit of the freedom that I feel like I have now, because there's nothing like putting your mother's ashes in an urn to remind you that all those years of her worrying, and honestly, the years of my grandmother putting this on her, were just such a sad waste of time and energy.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, gosh. Whew, what an image. RJ, what do you think about this?
I had a friend it made me think of who's, when I was younger, and a woman, and her mom always referred to her as the big one, because there were two girls in the family, and she happened to be like and she was thin and beautiful and perfect, but she was a little bit bigger than her sister. Now, of course, the irony is that their mother was bigger than either of them. But I wonder what it is about sort of the mother-daughter and the father-son relationship that is always so fraught, right? You hear mommy's mama's boy, and you hear daddy's little girl.
Yeah.
You know, there's something when it's sort of cross gender, cross sex, then it somehow there's room for more grace, more affirmation. But when it's the same, it's there's something. There's a lot of projection that goes on, and your child becomes a vehicle for your own insecurities and your own vicarious living, or maybe dreams you didn't quite achieve, and it's really just, it's hurtful. And so they're just all the body image stuff both ways. You know, you're either not thin enough, or if you are pretty, then that's dangerous.
Yeah.
That it's dangerous both ways. And how women kind of carry that, and that's really that's hard. That's really hard. Yeah.
It is hard. I mean, there's a relief, honestly, in like being 40. Like when I look back, I remember what it felt like to be, and now I work with women this age, but 22 years old. And I know women always recoil when I say this, but like sort of your peak beauty, and there's so much focus and pressure and the need for perfection at that point. It's really terrifying. Yeah, happy International Women's Day.
That's right. That was yesterday. Perfect.
Yeah, I mean, I think I just think the cure for everything is to remember how close we are to death. I really do. All our worries and our anxieties, because it just puts it all in perspective. Like, is this actually something that I need to worry about? And, if you're somebody that really feels like you might have, especially as a mom, have jealousy issues towards your daughter, I don't know what the father-son dynamic is really like, but I do know what that is like. And get some help. Because it just won't, RJ, you're so right. Because when we project onto our kids, they are such blank slates. Like, they have no idea what's happening, and you've got a whole world that you're putting onto them. Yeah. So,
to me, it boils down to can you see your children, and then actually as a child, your parents, can you see your children as a separate individual from yourself and not just a projection or a reflection of who you are? Can you stop seeing everything that your kid does as a reflection on you, for good or for ill, and just love them as they are as a person, and kind of let that go? And I will say, as a kid, I remember being very embarrassed about my parents. We all have that moment where we're like, oh my God, my parents are the most embarrassing people in the world. And then I remember thinking about it for a sec and being like, well, wait, but I don't judge my friends based on their parents. I don't actually, so maybe I can not feel so embarrassed of my parents because no one's looking at me through the lens of my parents, I don't think, Anyway.
Yeah, it's really hard when, especially, weight gain is seen as such a moral failure, and it's really not. From what I can tell, it's not certainly it's not a Christian category. I remember working for a ministry that they were looking to hire someone, and this was a woman, a position they were looking to hire, and one of the people who applied was, larger, and there was this legitimate discussion in the room that was led by the other women about whether it would be an impediment to ministry to have her as sort of a witness to as a part of the church. And there was, the men were taking it seriously, though we all felt like immediately like, let's not say anything. Oh my God, run for the hills. Yeah. But I remember feeling like, did I really conflicted? I wanted to say well, wait a second. If she's not good for the position, let's talk about that. But this should not be as part of, regardless of the legal implications, but it's we're talking about ministry. We're not, this is not a gym or something. And even if it were, but I remember being shocked that, but there's also studies that show all this stuff about, being paid higher if you're thin, or getting different jobs.
yeah.
And the world does. So
Yes.
the world does seem
Yes.
to certainly operates this way, and probably operates this way much more than most men are aware of.
And that is actually the access point for grace, is that these moms are generally afraid.
They're afraid for their
right?
daughters won't have the same opportunities.
They're afraid for their daughters, right? Like they're afraid, and yes, it's ridiculous, and yes, it's not fruitful, but like that is what's happening, is they are afraid, like you will miss out on opportunities if you don't present a certain way, or you will get made fun of the way I was made fun of when I was a kid. And and not, RJ, to your point, not seeing these children like in a whole different environment in the year 2023, just only seeing yourself and your fear in the kid. And we do all kinds of things, right, based on that. It goes way beyond this, but I did think this was like a very interesting way in.
No, that's good, because you're right. I do think there's a sense in which parents look to their children to redeem their own pasts, and for it's like their second chance at glory, and just the stage moms and
or second chance to not hurt,
or frankly, or golf dads of a certain type, or baseball dads, or whatever you have. You see this all the time, but to at least have an entry point for grace to say, right or wrong, this is how it seems to work, and people are petrified that their children will hurt in the way that they did. And to be honest with you, like I think of the three here, I don't know if this is positive, but I think I'm the only one that shopped in the Husky section for myself as a kid. So I was a larger, before I started swimming, I was chubby, and it makes a mark on you that you never sort of leave behind. And so I'm conscious of it with my own children, and who also have the same body type. And we end up having these discussions all the time, not all the time, but we try to have these discussions. And my wife and I do, and we haven't solved it in any way, but I remember my brother John saying, the second you make it an issue, it's going to become a shame thing. The second you talk about it almost at all.
Totally.
And that's with young boys, it's not rather than girls. So I guess what I'm saying is your article produced compassion in what I was reading, because it is easy to judge mothers who are really hard on their daughters for eating potato chips. That's
for eating.
Eating.
Period.
They're almost like the most convenient villain we could find, right?
Yeah, I do. It's funny that the thing that's coming up for me right now is, because I think my mom had clearly had this. I remember my mom, God bless Deborah, she's dead. I can tell the stories now, but this was not that long ago, and her mom was still alive, and her mom was in her 90s, and my mom had found this jacket she really liked in a department store. The three of us were shopping together. Like literally, we had broken my dementia-ridden grandmother out of, the old folks home in the Delta, and just to go to the department store and shop. And we're in there, and my mom put on a jacket, and my grandmother was suddenly, 35, and my mom was suddenly 8.
Gosh.
And she leaned back and she said, "Deborah, turn around. Let me see the back." And how does your butt look? And my mom rolled her eyes and did it. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is... but I remember my grandmother at one point, she would comment a lot on appearance. She was a hairstylist. And so she was very into physical appearance. She was a very beautiful woman. And I remember her going after me about what I looked like. And we were all in a hotel room together. My mother looked up and she goes, "Lois, you need to shut up." So I think that is the best way to curb any feelings of shame if you're looking for
Well,
points.
we're going to move into further into this subject, because, Mockingbird, as I mentioned in the opening, we have a new issue of our incredible print magazine on sickness and health. And one of the people we interview is a journalist named Rena Raphael. Rena's actually speaking at our New York City conference. She's this brilliant journalist who's used to work at Goop, and she's written a book called The Gospel of Wellness: Gyms, Gurus, Goop, and the False Promise of Self-Care. And it's a fascinating book. she says that her research is about more than just debunking wellness myths. It's, quote, about American women's search for a cure to all that ails them and their journey to regain something that they believe they've lost. Now, Megan Ritchie, one of the co-editors of our magazine, interviewed her, and Megan started out by saying that there's this great line in the book, Rena, where you cite 72% of moms are stressed about how stressed they are. She says, I'm not a mom, but I really relate to that. And Rena responds, she says, we have this perfectionistic, performative idea of what wellness is, right? I recently did a story for the LA Times where I was speaking to therapists who worked with teen girls. These girls were becoming stressed out about not having enough time to do skincare masks and take bubble baths. They were blaming themselves for being stressed, even though, life can be very stressful for teens, but they had this idea that they needed to set aside more time for basically skincare rituals. It's just absurd. But all of that is in addition to how this industry preys on women and their vulnerabilities and desires. For example, because of body image pressures, diet culture has snuck into wellness. You'll see a bunch of supplements for self-care that are really about beauty or anti-aging. Then she goes on, she says something interesting. She says, I think a lot of the ink that we used to spend on fashion is now being spent on wellness. So which means the people who are writing about it often have little to no training in health or science reporting, and it's rarely impressed on them that they should be looking under the hood of these claims. Now, I'm not saying today, when she talked about the why here, that the pursuit of health is literally a religion. What I'm saying is it's adopting a framework similar to religion in the sense that it's regulatory and prescriptive. And I don't think it's a coincidence that many of the people most adoptive of wellness culture are also the ones moving further and further away from organized religion. This idea of becoming as healthy as you can really does offer people a sense of purpose, community, identity, the kind of things organized religion used to offer us. But she says one of the reasons she wrote the book was Sarah, her father died. And she says this, I realized that no one from my gym was going to come to my house with a casserole.
Yeah.
Now, she's an observant Jew, Rena is. But she says this, and when people are looking to their gym or their fitness instructors for life lessons, oftentimes what they get are very generic platitudes that really lack substantial meaning and don't necessarily apply to specific episodes in people's lives. Grief being one of them. For me, the idea of going to my gym during grief was just absolutely absurd. The gym wasn't going to offer any memorial rites or anything beyond essentially what whittled down to working on your body. And we all have to take care of our bodies, but this conflation of spiritual dogma with what is essentially a business can become conflicting. So instead, she found solace in the Jewish prayers of her youth.
I mean, good for her.
There's a lot of insights in this. I mean, that's just a small part of our interview.
Yeah.
But I think, first of all, like the fact that we write that wellness is sort of, we talk about wellness the way we used to talk about fashion, and that those are the same people writing about it. And it's not. It's technically supposed to be science if it's actually about wellness. The search for something religious, some sort of meaning that goes on behind wellness culture, and but also she feels deeply compassionate for people. Like she there's a lot of compassion. It probably didn't come off in the excerpts I read, but the fact that you're being this thing that's supposed to help you feel better is actually becoming a new source of stress, a new burden. Like the girls being stressed about not having enough time for their skincare rituals, or the moms being stressed about how stressed they are. That sounds a little bit like a curse to me. But I'm not as ensconced in this as you might be, Sarah.
I mean, a curse is such a good word for it. Like, it is a curse. I mean, it feels like we've been cursed, that we have to, it's one more thing to keep up with. And also like the teenage girls, y'all, come on now. I was out in the sun slathering oil on my face, just like, bake me, please. I mean, it's just so funny to me that they're like into skincare.
Butter me up.
Like, I think I got into skincare when I turned 30, and I'm not sure my skin looks a whole lot better. I don't know. This is what we know. Okay. This is what we know. Botox, retinol, fillers, Rogaine. These things work. None of the rest of the stuff works.
Ozempic.
So, yeah, Ozempic. And so what is it? I mean, I think it's such a great question she's asking is like, what is it that ails us that we're seeking a cure for ultimately? Because these aren't things that cure. I mean, y'all know I've tried every snake oil thing for hair out there, right? And ultimately, the only thing that's worked has been the actual medicine that a dermatologist gives me. But clearly, there is a need for people to feel. I mean, I do think there's connection to other people. I also just think it's control, right? In a world, I keep thinking of that Anne Lamott quote that we used. So loved, so ruined, and control over so little. Yeah, I don't know. RJ, what do you think? Where are you with this? Who's your wellness guru, RJ?
Who is my wellness guru? I don't know.
Jesus.
Jesus. I think a lot of it stems from what we've talked a lot about, where the American obsession with happiness, and that the natural state of the human person is to be happy, which is just not true.
Right.
You know,
yes,
and that if we could,
not true.
It's not true. And if we could just give ourselves permission every so often to be unhappy or tired or confused or exhibit any negative emotion and not feel guilty about it, that would go a long way. And I'm speaking to myself. You know, I was feeling really under the weather on Tuesday and sort of half of Wednesday, and I'm looking for every reason why it's my fault. You know, and my wife is just like, RJ, you're sick. It's okay to be sick. It's not your fault. Just like take it easy and you'll get better. But I feel guilty for being.
Oh my gosh, you're just in a few. Sorry, RJ, but like next week, I think it's the next week. Is not this Sunday. Is the healing the pools of Siloam? You know, and they say like what did his parents do? Right?
Yes,
what did he do in the womb that like he's blind now? How is this his fault?
Yes, and that's. I think that's the curse of America. That's the dark side of American positivity, which has a lot of wonderful things to commend it. We get stuff done, and we got kind of a cool culture here, you know. But the dark side is like, God forbid you ever have a moment of unhappiness. Yeah. And because then you feel not just unhappy, but you feel guilty on top of being unhappy, because I ought to be happy all the time.
I want to say that she does mention that like wellness culture, the popularity of it should be not, it cannot, first of all, there is an economic aspect to this, and it seems to make tons of money. Like it's very successful to appeal, because you're appealing to people's insecurities. But secondly, she says it should be a measure of how much pain people are in and how unhappy. And we talked last week about the sort of female unhappiness, or we could talk about male unhappiness. It's just that people are very sad. And I think that they're looking for an answer, and we all are. And so you can't blame folks for aggressively looking to, you know, I don't know what it is, new sleep technologies or something like that. There's so.
What's your number?
Your sleep number?
I literally do like a cost analysis now. Like that's where I am with this stuff. So I'm like, okay, let's say I start a magical hair treatment. Okay. Let's say I take these vitamins and they do what they have promised, although we know that's not going to do that because that's not how it works. And it is $80 a month. Okay. Then I think, well, okay, at what point do I not want hair? So am I doing this for my lifetime? You know what I mean? Like I literally start to think that, and then it kind of pulls me back from it. But I have to like do some pretty serious like
cost-benefit analysis.
Yeah, I totally do. I mean, it's why I haven't started Botox. All my friends have done Botox. My best friend sat me down the other day and was like, girl, it's time. And I'm like, but that's like, once I start it, you know, like it's, I don't know, it feels like these can all to me feel like these, like everyone's getting on the train. We've all just got to agree to it. and like I don't know if I want to yet. So I don't know. It's hard.
When do I want to look like Joan Rivers? I don't know.
100%.
She gets into like they talk about manifestation, the kind of the people who are manifestation gurus.
Yeah.
And they talk.
What does that mean?
That's what I am. Hello.
It's like
You're a manifestation guru.
No, I'm not. But my college students use that word. So it's
What does that
interesting.
even mean?
Like you're manifesting something.
Because the way you're thinking about something is making it happen, and it's slightly superstitious,
like
but it's
secret.
also
The secret. If you put out good energy, it'll come to you. You know. Thanks, Oprah.
It's a little bit like that, but I guess
Name it and claim it.
Rena talks to going to a some sort of seminar on manifestation, and she asks the question is like, so you're telling me that the Jews who died in the Holocaust just weren't manifesting their release hard enough, and it's just like you could hear a pin drop, and it was heavy. And she said that they said that most of the manifestation seminars that she had gone to for the sake of the book were filled with sort of Gen Z and millennial women, and who were fairly comfortable. They weren't actually trying to meet basic needs. The manifestation gurus were not going into the slums. They were.
Because their trickery doesn't work there. You know what I mean? Like, it can work when we've got like a Yale education and we live in suburbia. Then you can feel like you're manifesting all kinds of things.
So let me just say that the root of that is I am in control of everything with my mind. I am God.
Yeah.
I am God, and I can control reality with my mind. Let's just call that what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
well, here you have two different. We've talked about like different attempts to solve inner pain, or one of Sarah, you talked about how we cannot shame ourselves, people into thinness or health or something like that, and she's basically saying the same sort of thing, that you can sell them products, but it's not going to actually cure them. I love the line about the casserole in the gym, and we all know on one level, I think, that these things don't actually work, but another way that we try to address pain and sin and trouble, I think, is through language and changing the language we use. And there was an unbelievably it was a long but a powerful article in The Atlantic this past week called "The Moral Case Against Equity Language." This is by George Packer. Now, bear with me. This is a sort of hot potato. It's the Sierra Club, I guess, just published an equity language guide. It discourages using the words stand, Americans, blind, and crazy. The first two fail at inclusion because not everyone can stand and not everyone is living in this country as a citizen. The third and fourth, even as figures of speech, like legislators are blind to climate change, are insulting to the disabled. And so he goes through the various examples of this, and we all, at least in my church denomination, this is very familiar territory. This is what he writes, though. He says, the rationale for equity language guides is hard to fault. They seek a world without oppression and injustice. Because achieving this goal is beyond anyone's power, they turn to what can be controlled, and they try to purge language until it leaves no one out and can't harm those who already suffer. Avoiding slurs, calling attention to inadvertent insults, and speaking to people with dignity are essential things in any decent society. It's polite to address people as they request, and context always matters. A therapist is unlikely to use terms with a patient that she would use with a colleague. But it isn't the job of writers to present people as they want to be presented. Writers owe allegiance to their readers and to the truth. The universal mission of equity language is a quest for salvation, not political reform or personal courtesy. A Protestant quest, and despite the guide's aversion to any reference to U.S. citizenship, an American one, for we do nothing by half measures. The guides follow the grammar of Puritan preaching to the last clause. Once you have embarked on this expedition, you can't stop at Oriental or thug, because that would leave far too much evil at large. So you take off in hot pursuit of, quote, gentrification or legal residence, these are terms, food stamps, and gun control, until the last sin is hunted down and made right, which can never happen in a fallen world. Here we go, this is the final, what he has to say. This huge expense of energy to purify language reveals a weakened belief in more material forms of progress. The guides want to make the ugliness of our society disappear by linguistic fiat. Even by their own lights, they do more ill than good, not because of their absurd bans on ordinary words like congresswoman or expat, or the self-torture they require of conscientious users, but because they make it impossible to face squarely the wrongs they want to right, which is the starting point for any change. Prison does not become a less brutal place by calling someone locked up in one a person experiencing the criminal justice system. Obesity isn't any healthier for people with, quote, high weight. It's hard to know who is likely to be harmed by a phrase like native New Yorker or under fire. I doubt that even the writers of the guides are truly offended, but the people in the slums of Mumbai know they're poor. They can't afford to wrap themselves in soft sheets of euphemism. Equity language doesn't fool anyone who lives with real afflictions. It's meant to spare only the feelings of those who use it. The reason I get to this is we're going to talk about theories of change, how people change, how things change. And I think that we're all, this is not actually, I don't think that new of a phenomenon. I think it's got long roots. But if we just use the right words, people will mean the right things and they will, problems will cease. And, the purity language, it's a real thing and it becomes a huge burden around folks. But he's saying that, in fact, the real purpose here is to make the people talking about these problems feel better about themselves rather than the actual ones experiencing the problems.
I mean, I do buy this, but everything is up for grabs in terms of like we have to get it all right, And I, as somebody who tends to lean left, want to get it all right. I really do. And I work with people who, these young people, they want me to get it all right. They want to be all right all the time. But sometimes that just doesn't happen. And sometimes we're not all up to date. And like, and sometimes the real issue is just being completely avoided because we want to, I don't know, I can see it sometimes as a tactic to stop conversation about one thing to lead to, I just think it can become this real like overcorrective way of not really communicating with each other. And, when I think about my family in Mississippi who tends to lean more to the right, I'm not talking about you, Becky. I would miss out on so much relationship with them and interaction and love and joy with them if I corrected them in conversation like that, right? Like I would totally miss out on that. So it's like when it becomes a relationship barrier, I think we're kind of, I know I shouldn't say this, but shooting ourselves in the foot because, you're not able to actually like, you're not able to have a whole beautiful conversation with this person. It also just assumes a rightness that's very classist to me.
It is very classist. There's no question of it. That's always the ghost at the table that no one wants to talk about in these conversations. Yeah. But I would say that I had to lived in Germany for a while when I was a kid and had to be thrust into speaking German in high school, and it was not easy. And the only way to do it is to kind of start speaking, and you make mistakes. And there was I had one guy who wanted to be my friend, but he was constantly correcting my German. I just didn't want to hang out with him anymore because I thought to myself, I have yes, I'm getting it wrong, and there's going to be, I want to get better at how I'm speaking. But if you keep correcting me while I'm doing this, it becomes a power thing where you're always standing above me, and I don't feel comfortable, and I feel criticized, and I just want to run in the opposite direction. That's how I think. I think a lot of this equity language stuff, it feels to me increasingly like code switching. Like if I'm in a progressive space, I know I have some sense of words I can use and not use. And if I'm in a more conservative space, I know what words I can use. And in fact, like if you're in academia, all the kids who have any sort of traditional leanings have to learn to speak two languages. It's just, that's sort of that's the world you're going to live in. But I think that the attempt to change people's hearts by changing the words they use is simply, it's profoundly, if that's really what's going on, and I know that you're really just trying to safeguard you're trying to make it so some people don't feel like they're constantly being insulted through language that is practices that are difficult. But or racist or biased or the result of some ignorance, but you're not going to affect actual change at any level if you think you can do it through changing the words people use. I just don't think that's how anyone changes. RJ, what do you think?
I agree. I mean, first of all, when you're talking there, it just sounds like you're talking about different approaches to church, for one. Is church a place where people have the freedom to sort of be themselves and work it out? And they may even be a little bit, if they're really working it out and they're experiencing God's grace, they may even be a little bit worse in church than they would in their regular life because they feel that they're sort of working the dross out. Yeah. But if your approach to Christianity or religion is to be constantly correcting people who are making mistakes, that sounds awful. That's not the kind of church I want to be a part of. So it feels very religious. As we're talking about the language that people use. It reminded me of The Last Emperor. Remember the movie The Last Emperor? About the last emperor of China? You guys seen that? Bernardo Bertolucci won like 11 Oscars like 30 years ago? No, it's a really beautiful movie. But in that, the last emperor after the Cultural Revolution goes to like re-education camp. One of these kind of, and he's there for a while, and he there's a man who's in charge of the camp who's pretty harsh, but they finally develop a relationship, and the person who was the emperor comes to see him as a pretty fair guy, and then he's let out of this re-education camp and to go live his life, and then he's walking down the street one day, and he sees a bunch of student revolutionaries who have bound this man who was the head of the re-education camp because he hadn't gone far enough. So the person who was part of the first revolution is then branded a counter-revolutionary and persecuted. And the last emperor says, I know this man. He's a good man. He's a good man. But it wasn't enough. It keeps on going and keeps on going. And when does it end?
Purity.
It's the purity spiral, right? The prophets of this new purity, 30 years from now, 10 years from now, they won't be pure enough. It never ends. It never ends. So, I like you said, Sarah, at an interpersonal level, of course, I want to treat someone with gentleness and respect and kindness and love. And if someone asks me to say something a certain way, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah.
But to think that I've got to be constantly worried about what might come out of my mouth because it might be the wrong thing or offend someone somewhere.
Well, it makes me think of parenting and how you can tell a kid like to do something in a certain way in a really aggressive, like you can be really aggressive and yell at a kid and they'll do what you ask them to do. Like you're bigger than they are, you're louder than they are, whatever, right? But they won't mean it. But if you take the time to be in relationship with your kid and love them and say, hey, like this is a better way of doing this because of this. And like you're present to them, it's like flowers to the sunlight. Like they're
totally.
Just like, oh, this is what we do. And this is why. And it's such a beautiful process. And I just think we've lost our sense of nuance, our sense of tenderness. And also, like, if you're living in this world, and I think for a lot of people that are policing language, it's, they're almond moms at the end of the day, right? Like, it's like, I'm being terrorized in my own head. I'm going to terrorize you. Like, I'm allegedly keeping you safe just like I'm keeping me safe. But really, I'm just terrorizing everyone around me. But yeah, I mean, I'm happy. Like, I definitely am happy to get on board with whatever language people want me to have with them interpersonally. But it is like, I don't want to live in a world where I'm constantly being corrected. Like that's, I don't know.
But I also think like the attempt to label, use different words to describe, as the example of like, you're not in prison, you're a person who's experiencing the criminal justice system.
Right.
I mean, like that. It's true. It's not like it's not news to that person. The only the person who's feeling better in that situation is the person not acknowledging them as a prisoner, and because if you're in there, I'm sure you feel imprisoned, and if anything, it's driving a wedge between you. And he actually uses a couple of examples of, descriptions that sort of people would use to describe their own experience, and that if you completely basically gentrify, even though that's not the word you're supposed to use, but if you suck any kind of value judgment from the language, you just end up completely distancing yourself from that person's actual experience of their situation. I mean, one of the examples I always find is like, in the world where you have to, what do you say, Latina, Latino, or Latinx? And every person of a Latin background I've talked to seems to say, don't say Latinx. We don't like it. No one ever asked us, and like, stop it. It makes a mockery of our language. But then if I'm in sort of basically white spaces, that's all they use. And it's like,
Right.
I'm so confused. It's like, who are we trying to what are we actually trying to do here? Are we trying to make
Right.
ourselves somehow feel purer? Or
Yeah.
are we trying to care for the people who we're talking about? And that is maybe that's a bad example, but I find it to be.
I mean, I think it's a really good example because, for as many people I have that are part of the community are all different opinions, right, about what they want.
Right.
And I think that's why we need to know people and love them and be friends with them. And also, I mean, I think it's a really valid question, Dave. Like, when we're in these bigger rooms, like, what is that code switching looking like for us internally? Why are we doing it? Who are we doing it for? And are we all, and I think the answer is yes, just like anxious little, and we say in my family when people are misbehaving, anxious little peanut butts just running on a treadmill.
I talk about this because this is interesting for a lot of reasons, but one of the cornerstones of this issue of the magazine, the Sickness and Health magazine, is an article by my younger brother Simeon called "The Cure of Souls: Theory of Change in Christian Ministry," and it gets down to how you believe people actually change. Do they change through linguistic means? Do they change through shame? Do they change through being told what to do? Do they change through love? Like, what do people change ever, or do they not change at all? But this article is, I would just call it almost mandatory reading. It's fantastic. He writes this: what is theory of change? Basically, it's the strategy that an organization uses when it wants to make some change in the world through its activities. It's usually used in relation to nonprofits. Asking an organization about its theory of change is a way of getting it to articulate more explicitly what outcome the organization wants to achieve in the world, what strategy it is going to use to accomplish that outcome, and what assumptions the organization is making that lead it to think that strategy X will result in outcome Y. And he wants to talk about this in terms of Christianity and how people in churches. He talks about how some people ascribe to a sacramental theory of change and how the sacraments sort of imbue you with the grace you need to improve and to sort of live a godlier life. But he writes this: one other popular theory of change, especially common in Protestant circles, is what I think of as the Christian information approach. The working idea, so far as I can tell, is that the most important thing in determining whether Christians thrive and flourish is how much contact they get with the Bible. As God's revelation, the Bible contains a great deal of information about what God is like and how Christians should live and about the good news of salvation. As in the case of sacramental participation, the Christian information theory of ministry is built on several assumptions that are not always explicitly articulated. First, it assumes, very reasonably to my mind, that the Bible is God's inspired word. Second, and I think more controversially, this approach often subtly assumes that people are shaped above all by contact with Christian knowledge or information. Although we know that giving advice to people rarely works very well in life, we have an idea that when the advice or information is based in Scripture, the normal rules don't apply. Secular advice giving doesn't work, but somehow when you give advice from the Bible, we expect that the heart will change and we will be transformed. But there are several other popular theories of change. But what he's trying to say is that we all have some sort of operative theology, some idea of how people change. This applies to people outside the church. So, for example, if you think the sacraments, and especially the Eucharist, are central in ministry, then that means that whether you are conscious of it or not, you are committed to a certain theological assumptions about how the Eucharist mediates divine grace to the human will. Likewise, if you are a pastor who spends upward of 20 hours per week preparing lengthy exegetical sermons, then chances are your ministry assumes that people are most effectively transformed through deep contact with the contents of the Bible. Now, stop there. We're going to read a little bit more, but I want to know, where does this resonate? I mean, theories of change. I think we're all trying to get other people. Trying to get ourselves to change. We're trying to get other people to change, partly to be in less pain, as we've talked about here. the Christian information strategy is one that I've certainly been exposed to at some length, and he's not saying, by the way, that he's yet to weigh in on what he thinks is the right one. We'll get to that, but I've found that sometimes. Trying to just give people the right information or educate them in the right way doesn't always lead to the result I intended, and that's very much explicit in Simeon's article. What do you guys think?
I mean, I just think only God can change us, so it's hard for me to. I don't know. It's such an interest. I was there for this talk. This is the talk he gave, but and it was brilliant. But I think it's hard for me to think that I am an agent of change at all in ministry.
Well, I mean, do you get into ministry to change people? Is this part of what?
No, I think I get into ministry to offer people relief. I think that's like the most compelling thing to me. I mean, when I first started at Rice, I remember talking to the students who interviewed me, and they were like, well, what's the first thing you would want to do? And I was like, well, if we have a ministry fair, I just want to get a giant banner that goes across the table that says rest. And they were like, ooh. But, and I've never done that, but that's sort of been every single thing I've done. Right? Does that make sense in my job? So yeah, I don't know that I did not get into ministry to change people.
But it could be that that underneath that is the idea that people will feel better, or if they could rest. Like if that would be a good thing for them.
That's up to Jesus. You know what I mean?
Right.
That's kind of how I feel about. I don't know. It's always interesting to me that there are entire denominations that are, and I feel like ours is like this, but it's more like get out there and change the world. And then there are also wide swaths of Christianity that are like, get out there and change yourself. And, to me, it's just the same thing.
Change, yeah.
It's like impossible.
It's the law either way.
It's the law. Yeah, it's the law either way. So.
RJ, what do you think? This, by the way, he won't say this, but RJ's church was just written up in a denominational publication as an example of a church that's growing by leaps and bounds. So the RJ Heyman glory story continues, and maybe he understands these things better than. I'm just trying to give you a little authority.
RJ, tell us what you're
so
doing.
Much authority.
Tell us what you're doing, RJ.
I just think it's
not
the Holy
resting. I can tell you right that.
Yeah,
he's not resting.
I tried this week. I did, but as Fitz Allison used to say, the good Lord's going to get his Sabbath one way or another. But Holy Spirit, it's the Holy Spirit.
Mm-hmm.
But as Jesus says to Nicodemus, the wind blows wherever it chooses, where it comes from, where it's going, nobody knows. So it is with everyone born of the Spirit. So sometimes the Spirit works through communion, sometimes through music, sometimes through prayer, through Bible, through preaching, through fellowship, through service, through who knows how, right? And so you just kind of do what you're told to do.
Yeah.
They devoted themselves to the breaking of bread and prayers, to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, and day by day the Lord added to their number. Try to keep the main thing. Get people in touch with Jesus. Talk about Jesus a lot because
he doesn't
he
have
was
sticky
God.
notes. He's just like
riffing.
He's just like rattling the scripture off, like just rattling it off.
I will say,
no posters in his office.
I have more. I probably have more faith in the Holy Spirit to work through the Bible than I've had at any other point in my life because I see it happening, and I hear stories about it happening, and I so, I'm not saying that's certainly not the only way, but people want to know what's in the Bible, and they want to know about Jesus, and Jesus doesn't really need us to defend him. He speaks for himself and does his own work, so those are my 2 cents.
Well, Sim is all about what he calls the Augustinian theory of change, which is one that, frankly, undergirds what I think a lot of what we talk about on this podcast. And I'm going to lay it out for people because sometimes it's helpful just to say the thing. He says there are 3 basic theological assumptions at the heart of an Augustinian theory of change. This, again, applies to people whether you're in ministry or not. First, human beings are not driven by knowledge or will, but by desire. We are creatures of the heart, creatures of love. That's number 1. Second, The human heart is very hard to change. It strongly resists direct efforts to change it. The truth of this point is easy to demonstrate. Have you ever tried to change someone's mind about politics through rational argument? Have you ever tried to talk someone out of loving the person they have fallen in love with? I rest my case. Third, human beings are wired in such a way that judgment kills love. When we feel judged, we hide our love away. We put up our walls. We resist. If your theory of change depends in any way on the idea that telling someone what is wrong with them will lead to them changing what is wrong with them, you will be sorely ineffective. He goes on to say that he thinks that this can translate into 3 different principles for us in life. He says, first, it means the heart of Christian ministry, or I would say Christian life, is the facilitation of an emotional encounter with the God revealed in Jesus. I say this without condition or reservation. If you are not successfully engaging with people's feelings and desires, with their anxieties, their loves, and their pain, then you are just playing a game with Christian words. You're not doing ministry. In the context of actual ministry, this means that the best theology and truest Christian information are just ghosts and vapor until they are communicated in a language the heart can hear. Second, the Augustinian approach assumes that effective ministry always must deal with the fact of human resistance to judgment and law. It means that you won't end a sermon or a church service with a moral exhortation or a set of behavioral guidelines. But finally, an Augustinian theory of change means that technologies of the heart are important. Novels, stories, movies, illustrations, these are powerful technologies of the heart, more powerful than mere words or ideas. The reason we love stories, the reason we love art and music, the reason such things can be so transformative when we draw on them in ministry, is that they know how to speak the strange electric language of the heart. And this means that music is hugely important, by the way. Indeed, a lot of ministries have quite bad theories of change. They're still doing a lot of good in the world, still helping people because their worship music is doing the heavy lifting. If we're honest, we all know that a very average worship leader can get through to people more easily than the most brilliant preacher, if the preacher is relying on the Christian information approach. Agree, disagree, caveats?
Like we're going to come out here and disagree with Simeon. Okay.
He's smarter than I am.
He's 100% right.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, you never change anyone's mind by addressing their intellectual, addressing them intellectually. You know, the only way anyone ever comes to believe in Jesus is because they want to believe in Jesus. And then all their intellectual questions are very much secondary. It's mop-up work.
Yeah. I mean, he does
Yeah.
elsewhere in the article outline a very, very high view of the Holy Spirit as active in doing things that none of us can do. And that's really what matters here.
Yeah.
But, you have a lot of the frustration is borne out, and I tried to talk about this in low anthropology, but frustration is really borne out when you think that telling people what to do will somehow give them the ability to do it.
I always think there's a thing under the thing, and I just never actually think it's that we want to tell people what to do. I think we just want to avoid vulnerability in a relationship. And so that's what we go to. I really believe that. Like, I believe that we don't want to deal with our own pain. Mm-hmm. And so, and we certainly don't want to deal with the real pain of others, right? So instead, we just give them a directive. And, I met somebody recently who's in college ministry, and I don't know how successful their ministry is or not, but I was talking about all the one-on-ones I do. And they were like, I've never done a one-on-one in the history of my ministry. And I was like, how do you know them? How do you love them? How do you know what keeps them up at night? What do they pray for? Like, what? It's such a huge part of the calling is just to be present to pain. And you can't really be present to pain unless you've also acknowledged your own. We're just all pain avoidant weirdos, right? I mean, that's it, right? And I'm certainly as guilty of that as anybody else is. But my highest iteration, my highest hope for ministry is that I'm not pain avoidant, that I'm present, and that I can point to Jesus. And honestly, RJ's answer is the best answer, and it sounds like it's where Simeon's headed. And he's the Holy Spirit guy, but it is so out of our power, right? To change people. It's so up to God.
And there was this amazing video someone sent us this week of Jim Carrey talking about God being revealed in pain. And either pain is either a doorway to resentment or it's a doorway to gratitude. And the God revealed in Jesus Christ seems to imply that pain is not the direction away from God, and that in fact that's somehow connected to the experience of grace, experience of God in some not everly entirely understandable way.
Yeah, I mean I'm gonna keep talking about this. Is like RJ always rattles off like 8 Bible passages, and I only know the one I'm about to preach on because I've read it. But the whole thing with the blind man who was healed at the waters of Siloam, what's interesting to me is that at the end of that passage, so Jesus heals him. The Pharisees are constantly coming and being like, are you sure this is the guy who healed you? Are you, goes to his parents, are you sure this is the guy that healed your son? And at the end of the passage, he's excommunicated from the synagogue. That's really clear. Mm-hmm. And that's the end of the story. And I was reading this commentary that was so beautiful. It was like, Jesus does not solve all of our pain, right? Jesus just promises that we're not alone in it.
RJ, what are you're the guy. What do you think? You're the guy.
RJ, you're the pain guy.
You're the pain growth guy.
No. It's I don't know. I'm just thinking how good this is, and it's causing me to reflect on how I'm doing ministry right now and trying to make sure that it's kind of in line with these truths. And then I also think, I honestly count on the Holy Spirit to shut me down when I'm on the wrong track,
Yeah.
because I can't get this right all the time. I often pray, like, Lord, go ahead of me, be with me, and then please, like, clean up my messes and open doors that I need to walk through and close doors that I need to avoid, And so I was thinking about that I feel like I'm in the place in my ministry right now where I'm just kind of doing my best to move forward in the way that I think I'm supposed to and be faithful and just trust that if this is not the way I'm supposed to go, God will make that powerfully clear.
Yeah.
But I think this is a very good word from Simeon. I think an incredibly helpful reminder to me as a preacher and minister and pastor and all that.
I don't want it to. It's not a very technical essay though. Otherwise, it kind of comes off the way that I read it. I think it's just wonderful, and the way he ends it is fantastic. And for those of you who are frustrated or we're looking for maybe some fresh inspiration, it's a great place to start. But I wanted to end here with there was and I'll just read it. There's a wonderful essay that appeared on Mockingbird by Francis Bufford called "Where's the Next Brick?" And I'm not going to get into the whole thing. It's an extended metaphor. It's beautifully written. But the way he characterizes Christianity and the gospel is not as a mode of change, even, or as a kind of a tool to enact certain ends. He calls it a song of liberation, a startling declaration that power, that love, that justice, that order, that God, the creator of all things, weren't what we thought they were, but came closest to us in paradoxes. Wisdom came in foolishness, strength in weakness, sovereignty over the immense empire of matter in helpless self-sacrifice, in a choking man brought to death by a shrugging government. What's that about? How will that help me be thinner, richer, stronger, more successful? It won't. It will only help you to be kinder, braver, more tolerant of our inevitable imperfections, and more hopeful, more convinced that the worst that can happen to us as humans is not the last word, because there is a love we should try to copy in our small ways, which never rests, never gives up, and is never defeated.
Yes.
That's so good. Oh my gosh. I can't believe we got that and Simeon in the same podcast. That's so good. I mean, that's like the kind of stuff it reminds me of, I've referenced it here recently because somebody sent an email to me asking where it was, but the Stephen Ting thing, the old story, like it's the kind of thing you go back to that's like, oh, right, this is what this is. I mean, it's, people ask me all the time, why is it called Mockingbird? Why is it called Mockingbird? And, it's like, we say the same thing. We repeat God's grace, right, in the world where we see it, but also like it's a repeated story over and over because we forget so easily. We forget.
We forget. Well, yeah. Who could remind us better than Francis Spufford? I mean, good Lord.
Yeah.
And this idea, this restless pursuing love, surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. That at the end of the day, how does change happen? God does it, and who the hell knows?
Right.
So praise God. We try and fail constantly, and sometimes, by His grace alone, we get it right. But at the end of the day, the end of the story is not in doubt, because it's God who does these things and not us, and it's just our joy and privilege to be part of what He's been doing for thousands of years and will do on into eternity.
Well, amen to that. Thank you guys so much for being on today, and we'll get together in another couple weeks. Thank you both.
Awesome.
See you then.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. Remember, you can find us on the web at www.mbird.com. And we'd always love to hear from you at info@mbird.com. Audio production for the Mockingcast is provided by TJ Hester. And if you like what you've heard, please drop over to iTunes and leave us a rating or review. Until next time.